everyone. My name is Michael Clayman. I am rabbi of the Lake Success Jewish Center and president of the Great Neck Clergy Association. Over the past 2 decades, the town of Great Neck has witnessed tremendous diversity in terms of faith, cultural, and ethnic communities which have enriched community life. With such diversity, however, comes the challenge of becoming a cultural melting pot, with all of us learning to embrace one another in the spirit of tolerance, open-mindedness, and respect. Over the next hour or so, we will share a dialogue with representatives from a variety of cultural communities living in our town. We hope our discussion will help us better understand one another and further the causes of tolerance and open-mindedness, which are hallmarks of American democracy. In order to present a viable exchange, our program is necessarily imperfect, limited to a few participants. Our panelists tonight are all men, even though we reached out to both men and women. Our hope is that future discussions will include men and women and will focus on gender and sexual orientation issues, as well as issues of faith, culture, and ethnicity. There is an old rabbinic expression, all beginnings are difficult. Tonight provides an initial opportunity to address misconceptions we may have about one another, but more important, to discuss the issues which unite us. We only ask that whether you ultimately agree or disagree with the comments presented, you listen with an open mind and begin to appreciate our diversity as one of the greatest features of living in America. So with those thoughts in mind, I thought we would introduce ourselves. So Kevin, we'll begin with you. Just introduce yourself, and maybe we can share a little bit about our personal histories and our family origins. So you're on.
Great. My name is Kevin Sun. I grew up in Shanghai in the 1980s. Shanghai was and still is the most westernized cities in China. My sister came to the United States in 1990s to unite with her husband. I stayed in China and finished my college. I worked 2 years after college and decided to come to the United States to pursue my graduate degree in 2001. After I got my PhD, I became a faculty at the University of Hawaii. At the same time, my parents were staying with my sister in Bayside. So Hawaii was a little bit too far away from them.
Yeah.
Some of my friends started to join hedge fund right before the financial crisis. They asked me to join as well because I do a lot of research in global stock trading. So they give me the opportunity. I thought about it, and why not? Being close to the family and the lure of working for a hedge fund before the financial crisis, it's a great opportunity. So I took the offer, moved to the East Coast. So I met my wife 1 year after I moved here. We got married in the following year. We have 2 daughters. The older daughter was born in 2012, and in 2013, we moved to Great Neck. My younger daughter was born in 2015, and last week, I enrolled her at the Great Neck Public School for the class of 2033.
Oh.
So time must have passed by quickly. So by 2033, both my daughters will be in college.
I can tell you, it passes so quickly.
Right. Yeah.
That was hope to be as detailed. My name is Andre Vanterpool. I'm currently the program director at the Manhasset Great Neck EOC. My family grew up in Westbury, and I moved to Manhasset when I was 7 years old. Growing up in the community, going through the school system, and eventually graduating and going on to Stony Brook University, where I played basketball and also was a coach, director of basketball operations there, while I was pursuing my master's degree in social work. Since then, I've been the program director and social worker at the Manhasset Great Neck EOC in the community I grew up in. So I spend a lot of time of not only with the kids, but dealing with the families that I actually grew up with, and very familiar with that, with the experience of living in the town. So it's been very fulfilling to be able to give back and share the experiences that I've had with the generation now. So, that's kind of the shorter version of my story. But to be here, just having that experience of seeing how the community has evolved and changed has been quite an experience.
Wonderful.
So, first of all, thank you for holding this panel and bringing all of us together. This is a very commendable goal that you presented here tonight, Rabbi Clayman. Very much appreciated. No, yes, and of course, thank to all of you for being here. But these kinds of dialogues, I've been fortunate enough to be part of them over the past 25 years here in Great Neck. There certainly is a need for continuing dialogues like this, and very much appreciate you putting this forum tonight together, and hopefully there'll be many more such dialogues in the months and years to come. And it's funny, sitting here tonight, it's striking that I find that I have things in common with each of the panelists tonight. By way of background, I was probably the most defining moment of my life happened when I was 7 years old, when there was a revolution in the Iran where I was born and living at the time, and everything just changed. And really everything that has happened in not only my life, but lives of so many other Iranian American Jews that live in this community were also defined by that event, whether or not they were living at the time. Even the generations that have been born in the 40 years since that time were defined by that event. But when I was 10, my family started to come here, and just like Kevin, there was about 5 years of separation involved with that, where I didn't see my parents for 4 or 5 years involved with that. Eventually, my family was united. We grew up in Rego Park, Queens, again, so many other immigrants have, and found my way to Stony Brook for college. I did. Started writing for the Great Neck Record, where I was exposed to the community life and vibrancy. By then, we moved in '89. We moved into Great Neck and started writing for the Great Neck Record. Became the assistant editor of that newspaper after college, and somehow I ended up in law school. And I'm now a corporate healthcare lawyer living in Kensington, living with my wife of 2 years, Anya. Very blessed that she came into my life. And I've been as a bit of a community organizer and social activist over the past couple of decades. I've been on more boards of organizations than I can count, and I'm very happy to be living in Great Neck and this increasingly diverse community that you spoke of, which I really think it is a blessing, and I want to thank you that you counted it and characterized it that the increased diversity in Great Neck is a good thing. That's something to be commended, because it's not always in the life of the transition of a community, it's not something you always kind of feel when you're new in town.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for that.
And I think we're all part of cultures where, one way or another, we felt being on the outside.
Yes.
You know, and I know that certainly with my, you know, with my background as well. I'm a second generation American on both sides of my family. My father's parents were from Eastern Europe. My mother's parents were from Vienna. My wife is actually first generation. Her mother was born in England, born to two people who escaped Hitler. So I grew up in the Newark area. My parents both worked in Newark for many years, and I think growing up in that vicinity, I grew up with a background of you know, of tolerance and openness, and hopefully some of those things will you know, we can discuss in the course of our dialogue. So, with the introductions done, let's go on. We have a series of questions that we talked about that might be of great interest. So, going with this one, with the growing diversity in Great Neck, what do you think are some of the challenges and some of the issues that we need to address so that we can strengthen our bonds as a community? So I open that up.
I mean, look, communities in the 21st century is an interesting thing in the sense that people don't even need to interact with real people anymore. They can just go online and interact in the online community, and neighborhoods have been transformed online. For example, you know, you need anything, you go to there's a Great Neck Mommies group on Facebook, that where a lot of the things that the neighborly things, hey, where do I find the plumber, who do you use for landscaper, things like that, are now transported online. So it adds opportunities and challenges, because in a way it's an opportunity to engage with your neighbors that you probably would not have engaged 10, 20, 30 years ago. In living in a suburb like this. On the other hand, you don't need to do it in real life. You know, going to your neighbor next door and asking questions. So it has kind of, I think that question is a fascinating one, but it's just different than it was even 20 years ago or 15 years ago with the advent of the online.
Completely agree. I think that when we use the word community, we have to understand that there's a difference between generations of what that really means when we talk about community, because it's ours. I can say, like, the older generations were more tangible, were more hands-on, were more interactions with different age generations when it came to life and the different experiences, as opposed to this to now. So, like you said, you may have a neighbor that you lived next to for 5 to 10 years and you don't know who they are, unless they were a part of that Facebook group that you mentioned. Right. So it becomes a sense of, when we talk about building on communities, of the importance of having the balance, because the internet and those type of communities are important because it helps us get information much quicker, whether it's groups pertaining to schools and sports teams or anything like that. It helps us get information out faster, but there should be a balance between, you know, reality and the virtual world. Many of us are just living in the virtual world and can get stuck in there as far as forming communities. So this sense of community that we mentioned, it can be discussed, it can be built upon if we have more tangible and reality-based approaches to it.
Most mainland Chinese use the WeChat platform. So people started the Great Neck WeChat group is from the people who take trains from Great Neck to Manhattan to work. So people share train information. When the train is delayed, what are the alternatives so that to make the commuter life easier? Then while more people join the WeChat group, we have a mommy's group, education group, and all sorts of group based on interest, like tennis group, soccer group. So when people started those all sorts of online chatting, okay, we share a lot of information about our kids, about our life. People started to know each other because we, for a suburb, each house is far away from each other. So to understand and know our neighbors on WeChat or any social media become a very important and convenient tool for us to understand our neighborhood.
Are those forums limited? Did you say that they're limited to the mainland Chinese community?
Well, no, it's an English. They have an English version app, so I'm always using the English version of the app. But of course, you can choose to use a Chinese version of it, and there are other languages like French, Spanish version of it. You can chat on it, typing Chinese, typing English. It's a form of a way for people to communicate. Basically, I view it as Facebook plus WhatsApp combined into one app. It's very convenient. So we use this to broadcast important school events, important school information, including the Board of Ed meetings, what's the agenda on it, and the PDA meetings, so that all the school parents, no matter whether they can attend or cannot attend, they have all the information handy.
The question for me is, how do we each somehow get out of that comfort zone?
Right.
I can certainly say for the Jewish community, from wherever they may have come, coming to the United States, it's natural that you would gravitate toward each other. There's a common culture and a common history, and certainly also living in this area. We come to a community, we're familiar with each other. How do we break out of that comfort zone and begin to have dialogue across ethnicities or faiths or cultural groups, so that while we are various Chinese communities and an African American community, communities of people of color, Iranian communities, Jewish communities, how do we reach out so that we're not just speaking with people with whom we have a common history, but that we can dialogue and speak with each other and learn more about each other? And that, to me, is a challenge of integration. I remember a number of years ago, I was meeting with the then mayor of Lake Success, and we were just having lunch. And as then the new president of the Clergy Association, I asked what he thought might be an area where I could be of help. And the one thing he said to me is, try to help us encourage the newer citizens of the area, particularly from the new Asian communities, to become more actively involved in community affairs. And I know that that's happened, but that's always, I think, a challenge for all of us. How do we speak not only to those with whom we're most comfortable, but maybe with people with whom we're not always so comfortable, and begin to establish conversation?
One of the things that you're beginning to see in Great Neck, and maybe beginning is not the right word, but I have been noticing, is that when common issues arise in town, you do see people joining together to have one ways to do things. And for example, I'm thinking of the school issue, school elections, library, so forth, where I know between the Iranian Jewish community, through, for example, Shiva and the organizations I'm part of, and the Chinese Association, the Chinese groups, they do a number of things together to promote common interests like education, because education is huge in the Iranian American Jewish community, as it is in, I'm sure, other groups that have been attracted to this area. So when these common issues come up, people do join forces to promote their common causes, and that is a beautiful thing. So it is happening on those fronts. And also to your point about the Lake Success mayor wanting to have the Asian community become active, and I have to commend the Asian community for taking up that mantle very quickly.
Yes. Absolutely.
I will also say that back in probably 97 or so, 95 or 97, when I remember the mayor of Great Neck, Isabel Barlotta, attended the Iranian Jewish Forum, encouraging everybody to become active and so forth. Just like you're saying, fast forward a couple of decades later, now of course the village of Great Neck mayor is Mayor Dr. Pedram Baral, who happens to be of the Iranian Jewish community. The community is also taking up that mantle. Perhaps not as quickly as you guys did, and I commend you for it. And there are historical reasons why we weren't as quick to do it, but very much commend you for having the wherewithal to take that up so quickly.
Thank you, Raymond. I want to add, coincidentally, in 1995, a group of the earlier Chinese families in Great Neck started the Great Neck Chinese Association with a mission of helping the Chinese family to settle down in Great Neck and also to promote our cultures. So 20 years later, Shire and GNCA has been doing a lot of wonderful events together, including the meet and greet with all the library trustee election candidates. And we have also a lot of culture events planned ahead. I also want to applaud the school administration to broadcast the important messages in Chinese, in Farsi, in Spanish, in all kinds of languages to help the new parents who are not familiar with the English language to be notified of the important events for their children. And also for the UPTCs and the PTAs, at all these important meetings, we have language translators. I know, Raymond, you have been doing translation for the Persian community. There are a lot of Chinese parents who are willing to be a translator at those PTA meetings for the Chinese parents. So I think with more people getting knowledge of how the school is running, how the community is running, how the village is running, how the park district
They'll
is running.
be more engaged.
They will be more engaged, yes.
I know we've talked about this informally. We should not give the perception that each of our communities is a monolithic group. I can certainly speak for the Jewish community. I'm just one representative of many, but there are a whole variety of groupings within Judaism, within the Jewish community of Great Neck. There are members of the Jewish community with whom I have very little conversation, because depending on the level of ritual observance, groupings tend to come together based on how much they embrace their faith and how much they embrace ritual. So there are people with whom I don't communicate that much. So I think it's important to recognize that even within individual communities, there are a lot of I don't want to just say divisions, but there are certainly
differences.
There certainly are a lot of differences which we have to acknowledge.
But I think that we spend a lot of time and energy exploring the differences as opposed to the similarities. And when you mentioned several things of several groups of, whether it's the mommies, that's something that everyone has in common. Right. So that's universal. So if you start looking at things as finding the similarity amongst groups and having that dialogue and seeing that we really there are many more things that unite us. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And if we spend that energy on discussing those things and talking about what was your transition like coming into America, everyone from every different country will have something similar to talk about in their experience. So a lot of times we're looking for people, if we're talking about sickness, you're only looking for people who have the same symptoms. So if someone has cancer and someone has HIV, they're all sick. we don't need to say, well, my sickness is different than yours. We're all, the commonality is the same. So how do you deal with those things? We need to spend more time on the similarities. It's because that also encourages a much more positive energy and more dialogue, as opposed to why there's a subgroup within the group and what's the difference and why that is, and all those, because that can take you centuries to understand one particular just one particular nationality, group, or etc. As opposed to we all, like you shared a commonality. We're married, have children. We all want what's best for our children. We all want to live healthy lives. We all want to be loved. We all want to be successful. These are things that we can all discuss without necessarily always exposing what we already know of the negativities that's there. We're just passing on these stories on and on.
Absolutely. I even find, just as a clergy person, when I get together with other clergy of various faiths, once we begin to talk, we realize that we face a lot of the same issues. They're the same accomplishments, the same joys, and the same frustrations. And we could sit and talk for hours, knowing that we might have disagreements on a whole variety of religious issues, but it's what brings us together, what unites us, the fact that there's so much to discuss, that we have a lot of dialogue. So I agree with you that that's even if we start small and recognize that the larger community may not be engaged. We start on a small level. In Hebrew, we call the expression at la'at. It's just little by little, and we build those building blocks.
At the same time, though, and again, I agree with everything. Understanding that we should be promoting what we have in common, and not focus so much on differences. It is useful in forums like this and elsewhere to also understand the history and the reasons why some groups maybe have viewpoints that they do, or perspectives that they do, because I think it will help you better understand their story, so you can have the conversations about what you have in unity. Because very often what happens is, when you're new in town, you don't even get to those conversations because people judge you based on your superficial characteristics. So first you have to explain who you are, why you are that way, to kind of break those walls, and then have the conversation about what you have in common. I remember one of my first exposures to these kinds of things in community affairs. I was probably 23 years old, and I was invited by Temple Isaiah, Rabbi Bonnie Steinberg, who was a lovely lady.
Cherished colleague.
Yes. She approached me and she said, look, we would like you to come. Would you please come to our temple one Friday night? And I believe a very cold winter. Please come. But she said, only for 20 minutes. We don't have a lot of time. People don't want to stay a long time. These things, just please come, talk for 20 minutes, and answer questions and leave. Right. I go there, and like I was going to talk for more than 20 minutes. I'm 23 years old. But I go there. I had some prepared remarks, and there was maybe 30 people there. And then I spent the next 2.5 hours answering very pointed, very tough, hostile questions from the crowd. And at the end of the night, this older lady came up to me, and in the huffiest tone she could muster, she said, "You are the most disarming individual I've ever met." Now, I'm looking at the anger and frustration in her voice, but I'm also listening to the words that this lady is using. And I just smiled and said, "Oh, thank you so much." Because I understood she's giving me a compliment. Because evidently the answers that I was giving to these questions about why we do this and we do that and so forth had helped melt some of the stereotypes away. Mm-hmm. So you could have the conversations about what we have in common and our common concerns and so forth. And again, right now, maybe we're not at that stage where everybody is Noontown and this hostile or whatever, so we can't be having those dialogues. But I think it is useful to be talking about the explanations and the differences and the cultural vestiges that explain why we may have the perspectives that we do, so we can go back to when we go on the street, the stereotypes melt away faster.
Listening to you, I'm thinking that part of this does involve our having to be willing to break some barriers. We have to break down barriers, and we have to be willing to take chances. Just one experience, not when I was living in Great Neck, but my very first position as rabbi was in Bradenton, Florida. Bradenton, Florida was a nice community, but we were one synagogue, very Bible Beltish, and people. My synagogue were very drawn to each other. There was a bakery in town owned by two Palestinian Arab men, and I got to be friendly with them, and I invited them to come and speak on Friday night, and to share some of their experiences. Now I knew that there were people who would object to this, and I received a certain amount of criticism from people. How could you have someone who may represent a community in conflict with us or with the Jewish community at large? And my attitude was, if we don't begin to sit and talk with each other, we are never going to break barriers. So I felt that this was so important, and I feel like that now. We have to be willing to take some risks so that we can get to the point where those barriers and walls begin to crumble, and we begin to speak to one another.
We have to be knowledgeable enough to know that you can't judge all based on one person. So whether we want to, it's not to make it any political thing, but do you want to base all the presidents on the current president? Do you want to do things of that nature? So I know that I don't represent all the African Americans in the entire world. When I say certain things, there are going to be people who disagree and people who agree. But the fact is that we can have an open dialogue, and we also see that many times people muster up a judgment or perception of a particular race, culture, and you don't even personally know anyone in that race or culture to even to formulate that opinion. A lot of times you're taking on other people's experiences and making them your own before you formulate your own type of experience. So if you believe that African Americans are dangerous, do you speak to African Americans to find out otherwise? Are you taking that approach to see? Are you having that open dialogue? Because many things are, I can say, an issue for the African American community that's stereotyped is the issue with police. In my conversations with policemen in the community is that I said to them that the opportunities to create positive relationships and bonds don't exist like they used to. So the PAL programs and things of that nature where children were interacting with police as well as parents because it's all involved. The only time that we engage with police is when there's an altercation. So there's no time to formulate a positive interaction, and you can place that on the Chinese community, any community, the Jewish community, to say that where are we creating situations where we can change the experience and the bond to say that I know what the stereotypes are, but my personal experience is to say that those stereotypes aren't real in the world that I live in. They may be formulated in the world that you live in, the perception that you have, that you've taken on other people's experience, but I can't place that judgment on all white people, Jewish people, Chinese people, Asian people, Indian people. I can't put that because through my experiences, I can say that I wouldn't be where I am without my experiences with these diverse and eclectic groups. So, that's how I look at it.
But you also understand, I know, certainly appreciate how our histories and our backgrounds make make it difficult to break that barrier. It's the resistance is there.
Yeah.
The Jewish community, for example, particularly the elder Jewish community, very much affected by the Holocaust and by Eastern Europe, and living in a time of instability for the Jewish community. Many Jews, particularly, at least in my community, the older Jews are still very much affected.
Yeah.
Are still very insecure, and therefore a lot of their reactions are connected with these historical experiences they've had, and being able to overcome that is even difficult 60, 70 years later. And we're still trying to break it down.
It's very difficult. And it's understanding that it's also a choice.
Yeah.
Like, I can choose to feel that all white people are racist. I can choose to feel that way. Or I can take my own experiences and say that there's otherwise. I can take those past experiences of years and years and years and say that this does exist. It does. I'm not taking that away. Those events did happen. Yeah. But I'm saying that you have the power to change your perception and your experience, because a lot of times people are very knowledgeable in communities outside of the actual community that they live in. Mm-hmm. So you're more abreast and aware of what's going on maybe in California or in other countries than you are on your own street. So what world are you living in? A lot of things are choice. But we don't discuss those things either. Yeah. Like it's never to take away through someone's experience, because many of us in many of our cultures have experienced traumatic things that pass down from generation to generation, and we don't discuss how we overcome that. We want to point out that my wounds are more, like I was saying before with the sickness, my symptoms are deeper than yours. I'm more sicker than you. It's like, no, we're all. Let's lay that to rest. That we can all talk about how traumatic our experiences were and our ancestors and things of that nature. But how do we move forward? What do we do about the present time? Because we often want to live in the past. Many times it's very difficult for people to be present.
That's right. And that's a good segue to, I was going to ask about goals and aspirations we had for our children. And again, just a personal example from my past, but it demonstrates that we can grow up in an atmosphere of openness and flexibility. I remember when I was 16 years old, I was very concerned about local politics. And in 1970, since I didn't live in Newark, but I was connected to Newark because of my parents working there. Newark elected its first African-American mayor, Kenneth Gibson. And I remember watching a post-election rally that took place in the headquarters of one of the local Newark politicians who was known for being he was a white racist. It was very, very clear from his statements, from his actions, and he was very proud of it. And why this was so vivid, he got up and the participants in his headquarters were angry that an African American won this election. And I remember he stood up, and I don't remember a lot of post-election concession kind of speeches, but I remember his to this day. He spoke about how this is what the general community wants. They want to see us arguing. They want to see us at each other's throats. We can't give them that satisfaction. And I still remember now the feeling of elation that I had, knowing that Newark had elected a mayor who I believe was great for the future of Newark and the greater community. But I also felt that it was time that this man be accountable for his past behavior. And I said to myself, and I still remember this, I'm glad he's getting his comeuppance in a way that maybe in the future the community will now change. The point I'm making is, as a 16-year-old boy, a Jewish white guy living in a suburb, I felt this connection to what was taking place in Newark, and I felt an anger about the prevailing racism that had existed. There's a reason why I must have felt like that. My parents had to raise me in a certain way to at least be open and tolerant and listen to various points of view. The point is, if back in 1970 a 16-year-old can have that experience with his parents, I have to believe that parents today can raise their children in an atmosphere of openness and tolerance where diversity exists on a much greater level. So I guess throwing that out, what do you see as some of the important goals and aspirations that we have concerning our children and how we want to raise them, what we hope for them, and hope for them within Great Neck even?
If you continue on just it's being mindful of what we're putting onto our children. So, you mentioned African American politics. I remember telling one of the teachers at the Great Neck High School, she had a daughter at the time who was 8 years old, and I'm saying, your daughter, from her understanding of the presidency, her first idea of a president is African American president.
Yep.
Like that's the first thought of her experience of having is African American president. And I remember it being a joke in the African American community for many years of it never being possible.
Yeah.
So I'm saying that you can't pass down those ideologies of negativity onto the children, understanding that they live in a much different world. Their information is at their fingertips, and a lot of times we were talking a lot earlier about them not discovering themselves and having a sense of their identity and knowing themselves not just based on culture but them personally. And I think that in this time it's a lot of opportunity for our kids to know themselves and make decisions based on who they are and not just what's given to them stereotypically in society and that nature, that life can be very different. It can be eclectic, it can be diverse, and you can find happiness in many vast things because there's examples of it all around, just like if the positive news and opportunities and experiences were spread and portrayed in media and world just like the negative, then we would have a much different perception and reality for our kids.
Unfortunately,
that's
what it never sells, never sells newspapers, and but I agree with you, and a word that's I don't speak Yiddish, which was the language spoken by my grandparents, but they're words that, of course, that have come down to us. And I think one of the most important words is the word mensch, which is a term for a complete, caring human being. I'd like our kids to be able to grow up, each one being a mensch, compassionate, concerned for all, active in the community, which is part of why I think that for all the impressive education in our town, one of my concerns is that there has to be a balance. I'd like to see is not, that as our kids grow and they're competitive and they're competing for the top spots in major universities, I'd like them to grow as human beings as well. I'd like them to have the time to be able to not only dialogue with one another, but engage in community, the kind of community service that's not just reserved for a resume, but that really speaks to the fact that we live in a place where we want our children to grow up as complete, caring human beings who have a sensitivity toward everyone and reach out beyond themselves, and again beyond a comfort level.
I want my kids to grow up to be mindful of different cultures. To add on to Andre's point, that we need to have a lot of positive events for us, the parents and the kids, all come together to celebrate. Each culture comes with celebration in their own unique and wonderful ways. However, usually only those people in that community or people with that culture background can participate in those events. So I strongly suggest that the whole Great Neck community to open up and promote those wonderful culture celebrations to the public, so that my kids can go to the Persian New Year celebration, and the Persian kids can go to the Chinese New Year celebration. So that I would love to everyone to come to those cultural events to have fun, right? And at the same time to improve our understanding of each other, and also to promote that the idea that we have many common beliefs and many common values. And in that sense, the parents, the kids, all can experience those positive celebrations, funs, so that we all grow, the kids can grow up, and the parents can learn something about mindfulness, about empathy, about the greatness of diversity.
I have to tell you, one of the things that strikes me sitting at this table is how much Great Neck has changed for the better. We are now looking at it, at least at this table, that we are all kind of on a level playing field, which is true. We're all part of Great Neck, and it's not, okay, well, because again, 20, 30 years ago when my community was new, it was very much not like that. It was like, okay, we are established, you're new. And this is how it's going to be. And this is how it is. And I will tell you that in terms of prejudices that Andre was talking about, I have gone back to the archives of the Great Neck Record from the 1940s and 50s, when the Ashkenazi Jewish community was just new to Great Neck. And there are letters to the editor that, oh my God, the Jews are coming, and what's going to happen to the town? And so my point that each of the constituencies sitting at this table and being represented in Great Neck, whether they know it or not, has been at one point new in town, at one point being discriminated against, and at one point being subject of prejudices. And to Kevin's point, talking about that, he would love for his kids to go to Persian New Year events and vice versa. I've been part of holding many Persian New Year and other cultural celebrations in Great Neck over the years. I will tell you, in those earlier days, the more established Great Neck residents wanted to have no part of it. And it is just so refreshing, and I'm now looking forward to living in Great Neck for the next, I've been here for 30 years and looking forward to the next 30 years because Great Neck is improving. And I really think that's a beautiful thing, and it gives me hope to hear these comments here tonight.
And look, there are a lot of the commonalities we can build around food and around music. When my son was at South Middle School, I remember the annual cultural night where people from various ethnicities, faiths came together for a two-part evening. One was introducing the food of your particular culture, and we share the food. And the second was a cultural performance, dance and music. And my only negative thought was, this is great one night. How do we build upon this and make this year-round? And how do we include parents? Because it's wonderful for our children, but I think that we do need to gauge our parents. And how do we create opportunities for parents to be able to participate, not just on once or twice, but something that's ongoing and builds from year to year. So I guess just again as a segue. Do you think there are events or activities or programs that we can work on together, that we should work on together, that perhaps can help us better appreciate the diversity within our town? What can we do? What should we be doing? What should we be working on?
I mean, you can implement them in many different places where sometimes the focus doesn't have to be the focus, meaning that if we were in a book club together and we all read the same book, but we would all give different viewpoints based on our experiences. But those are things that are happening at our local libraries, at our churches, where maybe you open it up to different people to explain how things are, and you're in those communities in inviting people down, because there's not many times where you'll see different ethnic groups in maybe the African American community isn't in the Chinese community promoting something that they're doing. So you were mentioning being visible. So we're having this event. We would love for you to come.
Right.
So now it's different than the invitation online. And when you physically see the person there, these are things that, well, let's get people in a room and eliminate the stereotypes. It doesn't always have to be such a heavy conversation. It could be directed. But now, because we've read the same book and we share views, we see things that we have in common. We're not even looking at the differences. These things continue, and there's so many, whether it's holidays, whether it's events, whether it's, maybe you hire someone, you're having an event, you hire a photographer that's different. To have that dialogue and experience from someone, it's just to say that you give people an opportunity to show you otherwise. There's so many.
One of the things that I always have concerns about, and I hope it doesn't come to pass, is that biases and stereotypes go away when there's a significant number of people of that group in the neighborhood, because it increases the interactions that Andre was talking about. The more interactions you have, the less biases you're going to have. But if there's a community, let's say if they're new in town, so there's not very sizable, or they're decreasing in town, where they're not so sizable. It could be the Hispanic community, the African American community, the Ashkenazi community, the Persian community. It really doesn't matter. But if, when I worry that as demographics of a community change, if one community or another, one group or another starts decreasing in size, so they become less visible, then that's where you're going to see the prejudices and biases go up, because there's just not going to be the interactions required for that. I will tell you, in my original hometown of Tehran, Iran, that is happening with the Jewish community. As the Jews have left Tehran, the anti-Semitism is increasing, not because of any political reason, because there's just less interaction with them. And I fear, as demographics in any community, demographics in communities always change, right? We're now more diverse than we were 40 years ago. I don't know what's going to happen in the next 20 years with each of these subgroups, as the children or the next generation don't necessarily either can't afford to live in Great Neck or don't want to afford to live in Great Neck. The demographics will change again. And if one group or another becomes a small, tiny subset, that's when you worry about the prejudices going back up. So that's something to keep our eyes on.
But we have opportunities for years in town, and since it's something coming up in January, we've had a day or an interfaith gathering to commemorate Dr. King. And I always felt that it's important and significant, but it's insufficient. It ends up being it's a weekend holiday. It's a holiday weekend. A lot of people are away. Maybe just as something to commemorate Dr. King and his work, there could be other things done. You talked about book clubs. Have something where people read, and I'm just thinking out loud here, read something written by Dr. King, or have other kinds of activities that take place, not necessarily that day, but all over town, engaging different people, just in dialogue, an opportunity to sit down together and to talk about commonalities like we're doing here. To me, that would be a much more meaningful way to commemorate Dr. King than just having a 1 hour, as inspiring as it is, a 1 hour commemoration where it's done and that's it. So I think that there's room for activities on a variety of levels. The Chinese community, the holidays and the festivals, I know very little. I would love to be a part of some greater activity where I can learn what you do and what the practices are, and I think that would be, for me, that would be incredibly meaningful. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with us. You know, I think that when people see you actively doing it, you know, it's kind of, you know, you test out, someone wants you to test the food out first before they taste it. You know, so that's, that's kind of how it is.
As a baker and as a cook, I'm always nervous about that. So our time is limited. So I want to pose just one final question and maybe just a brief answer, just to give us a sense of our role models. Who was a role model for you growing up, or a hero, someone who has inspired you to be who you are today? Just and a brief response, just.
I cannot represent the whole community because I'm only coming from one city in China. Even though it's large, it's one of the most westernized city in China, Shanghai. Yeah. So when I grew up, U.S. has a technology boom in the 1990s. Bill Gates became my role model of being a successful entrepreneur, developed a product that everyone in the world uses from his basement or college dorms. So, so that idea of American capitalism has already implanted in my mind as a kid, growing up in Shanghai. But of course, but of course, other parts of China, there are millions of other children.
Well, this is you.
This is only me.
Our time, we only have a couple of minutes, so I'd just like to get everybody's thoughts.
I mean, for someone I looked up to, I have to say my mother. Because depending where you're from in the situation you're in, you're looking at what success and survival is. And my mom was someone who was on dialysis 22 years before she passed away, and I watched her never complain and fight through and do everything that she could to provide what was best for me and the sacrifice that she made. And I see that's instilled in me, which is why I'm in my community doing those same things. So she it kind of ingrained in me from her, so I would have to say my mom.
Okay.
Look, there's an entire generation that lived through the Iranian Revolution 1979 that sacrificed themselves so that their children like me can be in a better country with religious freedoms and economic freedoms that we enjoy today. That generation is slowly dying out, but they had to give it all, whether it was family separation, starting new careers, and not knowing the language, like my parents, as you were saying about your mom, my parents and brother and so many members of that generation sacrificed themselves, and I hope that they're my heroes, that whole generation, because they're not getting the recognition that they deserve, because we don't think about the sacrifices that immigrants make when they come to a new land.
I would only just briefly say my parents definitely as role models. The two people always stood out for me were Dr. King and Robert Kennedy. I felt both of them tried to create, in a courageous, open fashion, tried to create a world in which, a world that would be all-inclusive. And struggled and obviously bore the pain of having to be pioneers, but it's what stands out for me. I know we only have about a minute left, so the final thought I just wanted to share was about, from my tradition, in our rabbinic history, there were two great rabbis of one generation, Hillel and Shammai, and they disagreed about their interpretation of Jewish law. But our sacred texts tell that when the students of Hillel would sit down to discuss interpretation of a law, they always first study the opinion of the school of Shammai. The idea that before they sat and made their own decision, they listened to a contrary decision, even if they ultimately disagreed. I think that I would like to see that tradition prevalent in our communities, where even in our disagreements we can come together and we can listen to one another, not always having to talk, but to listen, to learn. And even if we disagree, the first step is to be able to dialogue. And to, in the spirit of open-mindedness, to be able to listen to one another. And I hope that people who are going to watch this program will begin to think about some of these issues, and that this is the first of what will be several forums in the course of the next year. So from the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for participating tonight. I know this is not an easy thing to do. And I want to thank Erica Bradley and the staff of PATV for encouraging us and for supporting this endeavor. It was a very important first step. I hope there will be more. So this is Rabbi Klayman. Thank you, everyone, for watching.